My name is Elias Thorne. At 52, I'd spent 20 years meticulously curating the rare manuscript collection at the San Francisco Literary Guild. When the new director, Serafina Voss, announced in front of my entire team, Elias has been managing our ancient texts for 2 decades, I simply nodded, my hands steady on the polished mahogany table. I trust the upcoming digital archives presentation will be a success next Tuesday, I said, a polite smile on my face. The room, filled with young archivists I'd mentored, grew quiet. Serafina's eyes, sharp and ambitious, narrowed. She was 35, a rising star from a Silicon Valley tech firm. Hired 3 months ago to streamline our archival processes. Never touched a parchment scroll in her life. "What do you mean?" she asked. I chuckled softly. "You'll see." I walked to my office, the familiar scent of old paper and leather filling my nostrils, and began packing. 20 years of dedicated work fitting into 2 modest crates, photos of triumphant acquisitions. Awards for groundbreaking preservation techniques. The ancient, hand-carved inkwell my daughter gave me, etched with world's best archivist. Serafina followed, hovering in the doorway as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. "Elias, about the Alexandrian Codex project." "Not my concern anymore," I said, sealing the first crate. She left me alone after that. My team, one by one, filtered by. Few words were exchanged, just quiet handshakes and solemn promises to keep in touch. Lena, my senior conservator, lingered the longest. "This feels wrong," she whispered. "It's progress," I told her, though we both knew it wasn't. The truth was, I'd seen this coming for weeks. Ever since Serafina arrived, she'd been subtly chipping away at my authority, scheduling rare acquisitions meetings without me, questioning my preservation choices in front of our benefactors. Last week, she'd hinted to the Guild's board that my traditional methods were impeding their digital transformation initiatives. What she didn't know was that I'd been keeping detailed logs, every slight, every attempt to sideline me. I'd also been quietly preparing for the inevitable, because in 20 years of safeguarding irreplaceable cultural heritage, you learn to plan for every contingency. I loaded my crates into my old Ford pickup and drove home. My wife, Clara, was waiting with a steaming mug of tea and the knowing look that said she already understood. "How bad?" she asked. "Could be worse," I replied. But sitting there in my study, looking at those crates, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not sadness, something sharper, more resolute. Serafina had made a mistake, a monumental one, and she wouldn't realize it until Tuesday morning when the Global Digital Archive Initiative called, expecting their presentation on the Alexandrian Codex. A presentation that only I knew how to deliver. I'd started at the San Francisco Literary Guild right out of library school. Back then, it was a respected but struggling institution with grand visions and even grander financial woes. The founder, old Professor Alistair Vance, took a chance on a young man with no experience but a burning passion for history. I spent my first 5 years learning everything. Papermaking, binding techniques, the delicate art of manuscript restoration. By 30, I was leading the rare manuscript department. By 35, I was the expert institutions called when they needed ancient texts authenticated and preserved. I'd cultivated relationships with private collectors, historical societies, and international museums that kept the Guild thriving during the lean years of the 2008 recession. When other institutions faced closures, we flourished because our benefactors trusted me. Clara understood the demands. The late-night calls from European auction houses, the weekend trips to secure new acquisitions. She raised our daughter Sophia while I built something that mattered, something that honored the past and provided for our family, employing 63 dedicated scholars and conservators. But things began to shift when Professor Vance retired 2 years ago. His son, Arthur Vance, took over as CEO. Arthur, captivated by the allure of disruptive innovation, brought in consultants who spoke in buzzwords and saw priceless artifacts as data points. Serafina was one of those consultants who'd somehow convinced Arthur she could optimize our heritage engagement strategy. The warning signs were there from day one. She'd attend meetings with benefactors with no prior knowledge of their collections, then interrupt me mid-discussion to suggest digital-first approaches that made no sense for fragile historical documents. She reorganized my cataloging system without asking. Worst of all, she started scheduling calls with our most significant patrons, claiming she needed to assess their satisfaction with our digitization progress. 3 weeks ago, I'd walked into the office early and heard her on the phone with someone from the board. "Elias's methods are outdated," she was saying. "The benefactors respect him, but they need forward-thinking solutions. I can deliver the same results with half the overhead." Half the overhead meant cutting my team. People like Lena, who'd worked countless hours mastering the intricate preservation needs of the Alexandrian Codex, or Dr. Kenji Tanaka, who'd learned ancient Coptic just to translate a newly discovered fragment for our Egyptian collection. I should have confronted her then. Instead, I did what I always did. I focused on the work. The Alexandrian Codex presentation was our biggest pitch of the year. A $30 million grant from the Global Digital Archive Initiative for its complete digital preservation and global access. I'd been preparing for 8 months, building relationships with their lead scholars, understanding their precise technical and philosophical requirements. Serafina knew about the meeting, but not the crucial details. In her mind, presentations were about slick slides and generic talking points. She didn't understand that the initiative's chief historian, Dr. Evelyn Reed, detested formal presentations, that their grant director only trusted institutions who could speak her language. Precise, scholarly, no fluff. The irony was perfect. Serafina had fired me to appear decisive and forward-thinking. But Tuesday morning, when the Global Digital Archive Initiative called asking for Elias specifically, she'd learned the difference between managing data and managing relationships. Monday night, I couldn't sleep. Not from worry, but from anticipation. Clara found me in the kitchen at 2 a.m., sitting with a cup of coffee and my laptop. "You're planning something," she said. "Just thinking." She sat down across from me. 22 years of marriage had taught her when to push and when to wait. This was a waiting moment. "Serafina called earlier," I finally said. Left 3 voicemails. What did she want? Details about the Alexandrian Codex presentation. Clara smiled. She'd been there for every late night, every weekend I'd spent building those curatorial relationships. She understood what I'd built better than anyone. What did you tell her? Nothing. I'm not her employee anymore. That was when it hit me. The full scope of what Serafina had done. She hadn't just fired me. She'd dismantled 20 years of institutional knowledge, benefactor preferences, unique preservation protocols, and relationship dynamics that took decades to cultivate. The Alexandrian Codex project wasn't just about a presentation. It was about trust, built through dozens of smaller interactions, like remembering that their lead historian preferred detailed provenance reports over digital simulations, or knowing that their CEO made decisions based on long-term historical impact, not immediate ROI projections. Serafina thought she could wing it, show up with a standard pitch deck, and charm her way through $30 million in funding. She had no idea that the initiatives team would be expecting the detailed historical analysis I'd promised them, the one that existed only in my head and in the annotated research notes they'd never find. I opened my laptop and looked at my calendar. Hologate was scheduled for 10 a.m. Tuesday. By 11 a.m., Serafina would be sitting in Arthur's office trying to explain why their biggest grant opportunity of the year had walked out after 20 minutes. My phone buzzed. Text message from Lena. "Serafina's been in your office all day looking for files. She seems panicked." I typed back, "Files are on the guild server. She has access to everything." Which was true. She had access to acquisition records, basic patron information, standard project templates. What she didn't have was context, the human element that turned data into relationships. I poured another cup of coffee and opened a new document on my laptop. Started typing my resignation letter, the formal one I should have submitted months ago when I first realized what Serafina was doing. But then I stopped, deleted everything. Why make it easy for her? Instead, I opened my personal email and started reaching out to contacts at other venerable institutions, people who'd been trying to recruit me for years. By morning, I had 3 interview requests and 1 job offer. Clara woke up at 6 a.m. and found me still at the kitchen table, now dressed for the day. "Going somewhere?" she asked. "The old Capitol Hill coffee shop. Good Wi-Fi. Quiet place to make some calls." She kissed my forehead. Give them hell. I didn't plan to give anyone hell. I planned to let Serafina do that all by herself. Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m., I was sitting in the bustling The Quill and Bean coffee shop on Capitol Hill when my phone started ringing. Serafina. I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again and again. By 10:15, she'd called 7 times. At 10:23, Lena called. "Elias, where are you?" "The Global Digital Archive Initiative people are here, and Serafina's having a meltdown. She can't find the provenance reports they're asking for." "They're in the system," I said, stirring my coffee. "She says they're not. She's been up all night looking. Tell her to check the Vance Collection Project folder, under the Alexandrian Codex subsection, Historical Analysis." Lena went quiet for a moment. Elias. She says that folder is empty except for basic contact information. I almost smiled. That's because the detailed historical analyses were never digitized. They're in my journal. The leather-bound one that lived on my desk. The one you took home yesterday. Lena was quiet for a long moment. They're asking for you, specifically. The chief historian, Dr. Reed, said she was looking forward to discussing the unique preservation protocols you'd developed. Wish I could help. At 10:45, Arthur Vance, the CEO himself, called. Elias, I need you to come in. There's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. I was terminated yesterday. Effective immediately. I believe Serafina said, look, we can work this out. Maybe Serafina was hasty. Maybe she was, but I'm not an employee anymore, Arthur. I can't legally represent the guild in benefactor meetings, even as a consultant. Then name your rate. I'm not available. Which was true. I had a phone interview with Viridian Archives Limited at 2 p.m. Their VP of curation had called personally after receiving my resume that morning. By 11:30, according to Lena's texts, the Global Digital Archive Initiative team had left. They'd given Serafina 20 minutes to produce the detailed historical documentation they'd specifically requested. When she couldn't deliver, they'd politely excused themselves and said they'd reassess their options. Serafina called again at noon. This time I answered, Elias, you have to help me. This is sabotage. This is consequences. I can report you for corporate sabotage, withholding guild information. What information? I removed personal belongings from my office. The journals were mine. I bought them with my own money. All official guild files remain on the server. You know that's not how this works. Actually, it's exactly how it works. I was terminated without cause and without notice. The guild forfeited any claim to my cooperation. She hung up. 10 minutes later, security called asking me to return my personal journals. I told them to check my employment contract. Personal notebooks purchased with personal funds remained personal property. At 1:30, Clara called, laughing. Sophia just texted me. She saw Serafina on LinkedIn posting about exciting new opportunities at the San Francisco Literary Guild. Apparently, she's trying to spin this as a positive restructuring. How's that working out? 3 of your former benefactors have already posted asking where you went. Word travels fast in the world of rare manuscripts. By 3 p.m., after a very promising phone interview with Viridian Archives, I had my answer to Serafina's earlier question about sabotage. This wasn't sabotage. Sabotage implied I'd actively worked to damage something. I'd done nothing except take my knowledge with me when they showed me the door. The fact that Serafina hadn't bothered to learn how the department actually functioned, that was her choice. The fact that she'd fired the only person who understood the intricacies of their most significant projects, that was her decision. I'd spent 20 years building something valuable. Serafina had spent 20 minutes dismantling it. Now she was learning what that knowledge was actually worth. My phone buzzed with another text from Lena. Global Digital Archive Initiative called. They want to know if you're available for freelance consultation. Apparently, they're very unhappy with the guild's lack of preparation. I typed back, tell them I'm not available. But they might want to consider Viridian Archives Limited for their future archival needs. Sometimes the best revenge is simply stepping out of the way and letting people face the consequences of their own actions. Saturday morning brought clarity in the form of a phone call from Dr. Kenji Tanaka, my former colleague from the Ancient Text Division. Elias, I need to tell you something, he said. I probably should have told you weeks ago. I poured coffee and sat down. I'm listening. Serafina's been calling our international benefactors, not for relationship building, but for information. She wanted to know about contract terms, renewal dates, project scopes, things she should have learned from internal files. The picture became clearer. What else? She asked me to send her copies of all my benefactor correspondence. Said it was for quality assurance review. When I told her that was already logged in the CRM system, she insisted she needed the originals. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Did you send them? No. But Elias, I think she was building a case against you, trying to prove you were hiding information or mismanaging collections. That explained the sudden interest in my methods, the questions about my patron relationships. Serafina hadn't been trying to learn from me. She'd been trying to replace me with documentation she could control. There's more, Kenji continued. Yesterday, after the Alexandrian Codex disaster, she called an emergency meeting, told everyone that you deliberately withheld critical information to sabotage the guild. Lena shut that down fast, pointed out that you'd offered to train Serafina on all your accounts when she first arrived. Serafina had declined, saying she preferred to develop her own approaches. I remembered that conversation. 3 months ago, I'd spent an entire weekend preparing training materials for Serafina, detailed benefactor profiles, communication preferences, specific preservation requirements. She'd glanced through them and said, "Traditional archival management is too time-intensive for modern digital practices." "What's the mood in the office?" I asked. "Tense." Arthur called an all-hands meeting for Monday. Word is, he's bringing in external consultants to assess the curatorial crisis. After Kenji hung up, I sat thinking about the deeper implications. Serafina hadn't just fired me impulsively. She'd been planning it for weeks. The Alexandrian Codex presentation was supposed to be her proof that she could handle my responsibilities. A successful meeting would have validated her approach and justified my termination. Instead, it had exposed how little she understood about the work she'd inherited. My phone rang. Viridian Archives Limited. "Elias, this is Dr. Eleanor Vance from Viridian Archives. We'd like to schedule an in-person interview for Monday. Our team was very impressed with your experience. Frankly, we've been watching the San Francisco Literary Guild's recent changes with concern. Several of our partners have mentioned disruptions in their archival services. We're looking for someone who understands the importance of relationship-based heritage development." After she hung up, I realized Serafina had done me a favor. For years, I'd been comfortable at the Guild. Good salary, familiar routines, established relationships. But I'd stopped growing. I'd become so focused on maintaining what I'd built that I'd forgotten there were other places to build. Clara found me in the garage that afternoon, organizing antique books I hadn't touched in months. "Productive day?" she asked. "Enlightening day. I have an interview Monday with Viridian Archives. They're offering a 20% salary increase and equity options." "That's wonderful, but you don't seem happy about it." I put down the old volume I'd been holding. "I keep thinking about my team, Lena, Kenji, the others. They're good people caught in Serafina's mess. You can't save everyone, Elias. You can only control what you do next." She was right. Serafina had made her choices. Now she'd live with the consequences. My job was to make better choices for my own future. Monday morning, I put on my best suit and drove to Viridian Archives Limited's headquarters in downtown Seattle. The interview went better than expected. By noon, I had a formal offer: Senior Director of Archival Development. A 25% salary increase, full benefits, and a signing bonus that would cover Sophia's college tuition for the next 2 years. I accepted on the spot. Walking out of their offices, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because of the money, but because of the possibilities. Viridian Archives was growing fast, securing grants from major research universities and national historical foundations. They needed someone who understood how to build lasting curatorial relationships in a competitive market. Someone exactly like me. My phone buzzed with a text from Lena. "Guild stock dropped 3% this morning. Word about the Alexandrian Codex is getting around." I wasn't surprised. In the world of rare manuscripts, reputation traveled fast. Lose one major grant through poor preparation, and others started questioning your reliability. Serafina's modernization was looking more like incompetence with each passing day. Tuesday, the Seattle Times published a brief article about the Global Digital Archive Initiative, selecting Viridian Archives Limited for their Alexandrian Codex project. The $30 million grant I'd spent 8 months cultivating was now going to my new employer. Wednesday, Kenji called with an update. "Arthur fired Serafina yesterday, effective immediately. How's the team handling it?" "Relief mostly, but there's talk about bringing in another outside consultant to assess department efficiency." I felt a pang of sympathy for my former colleagues. They'd survived Serafina's brief reign, but corporate restructuring was like a virus. Once it started, it was hard to stop. "Kenji, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are you happy at the Guild?" Long pause. "Not really. Why?" "Viridian Archives is expanding. They're looking for specialists in ancient text preservation and international archival partnerships. Someone with your experience and linguistic skills would be invaluable." "Are you serious?" "I start Monday. If you're interested, I can set up an interview." Thursday, Dr. Eleanor Vance called with an interesting proposition. "Elias, we've been thinking about expanding our independent historical consulting division. We'd need someone to head it up, someone with deep institutional knowledge and established relationships. That's a significant expansion. We're prepared to make significant investments. The question is whether you know anyone who might be interested in building something from the ground up." I thought about Lena, about her expertise in digital preservation standards, and her frustrated ambition, about how Serafina had passed her over for promotion 3 times. I might know someone. Friday afternoon, I drove to the Quill and Bean coffee shop, the same place where I'd watched Serafina's world collapse a week earlier. This time, I was meeting Lena. Elias, I can't believe what you're offering. Believe it. Viridian Archives wants to build a historical consulting division. You'd be the founding director. Full autonomy, competitive salary, and the chance to build something significant. What about Kenji? Already accepted. He starts Monday as International Archival Partnerships Manager. Lena stared at her coffee for a long moment. Arthur offered me your old position yesterday, department head for rare manuscripts. Are you taking it? I was planning to until now. The guild will be fine. They'll hire someone new, rebuild what they lost, but it'll take years. And Viridian Archives is moving forward with or without us. The question is whether we want to be part of building something new or fixing something broken. She smiled for the first time since I'd known her. When do I start? By the end of the week, Viridian Archives had hired 3 former guild employees. Not through poaching or recruitment, but through opportunity. We weren't running from something. We were running towards something better. Serafina had taught us all a valuable lesson about the difference between managing data and leading people. Now we had the chance to put that lesson to use. 3 months later, I was sitting in a conference room at Viridian Archives' expanded offices reviewing quarterly results with Dr. Eleanor Vance and the executive team. The numbers were impressive. Historical Consulting Division up 200%. International partnerships increased by 150%. Patron satisfaction scores at an all-time high. Elias, your team has exceeded every projection we made, Eleanor said. The Alexandrian Codex implementation alone has generated 5 new grant inquiries. Lena, now Director of Historical Consulting, smiled from across the table. The ethical preservation framework went smoother than anyone expected. When institutions see that kind of meticulousness, word spreads fast. Kenji joined by video from Cairo, where he was closing a deal with a major archaeological museum. The international expansion is ahead of schedule. We're looking at 3 new markets next quarter. That afternoon, I received an unexpected email. Arthur Vance wanted to meet for coffee. We met at the Quill and Bean. It seemed appropriate. Arthur looked older, more tired than I remembered. Elias, I owe you an apology, he said. I made a mistake with Serafina, a big one. How's the guild doing? Surviving. We lost 4 major benefactors after the Alexandrian Codex situation. Had to lay off 15 people. Stock price still hasn't recovered. He stirred his coffee slowly. Serafina cost us more than grants. She cost us institutional knowledge. Relationships that took years to build. You can rebuild. Maybe, but it won't be the same. He looked up. I heard about your success at Viridian Archives, the historical division, the international expansion. That should have been the guild's growth. I didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say. Would you consider coming back? I could offer you Serafina's position, VP of Operations, full authority over archival development, patron relations, everything. I'm happy where I am, Arthur. Double your current salary. It's not about money. He sat back in his chair. Then, what is it about? Trust. When you hired Serafina, you chose to believe that relationships don't matter. That experience can be replaced with efficiency. That was your choice. I was wrong. Yes, you were. But the damage is done. Your benefactors don't trust the guild anymore. Your employees don't trust leadership. And frankly, I don't trust you not to make the same mistake again. Arthur left without finishing his coffee. As I watched him walk away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. He'd learned an expensive lesson about the value of experience and loyalty. 6 months after my termination, Viridian Archives Limited announced a major acquisition, the historical consulting assets of 3 smaller heritage preservation firms, creating the largest independent archival practice in the Northeast. I was named Senior Vice President of Strategic Archival Development. The announcement made the front page of the Seattle Business Journal. The article mentioned my previous role at the San Francisco Literary Guild, noting how my departure had preceded their recent struggles. Serafina, according to LinkedIn, had taken a position with a startup in Denver. Her profile emphasized her experience in organizational transformation and change management. There was no mention of the San Francisco Literary Guild, or what that transformation had actually accomplished. The poetic justice wasn't lost on me. In trying to prove that relationships don't matter, She destroyed the relationships that kept the guild competitive. In trying to show that experience is replaceable, she'd eliminated the experience that made them valuable. Lena and Kenji thrived in their new roles. The team we'd built at Viridian Archives was everything Serafina claimed modern business should be: efficient, results-driven, and profitable. The difference was that we built it on a foundation of mutual respect and shared knowledge, not corporate buzzwords and arbitrary restructuring. Last week, Sophia called from college with news that made everything worthwhile. "Dad, my business professor used your story as a case study about the importance of institutional knowledge and relationship management. She called it the guild's oversight." "What did you tell her?" "That my dad always said the best revenge is living well." Clara was right as usual. You can't save everyone. You can only control what you do next. 6 months later, the San Francisco Literary Guild's board of directors forced Arthur Vance to step down as CEO after a series of failed grant acquisitions and mounting financial losses. Serafina's startup in Denver folded within 8 months, leaving her explaining the gap in her resume to increasingly skeptical employers. The organizational transformation she'd championed became a cautionary tale taught in business schools across the country. Sometimes the most satisfying victories are the ones where you never have to throw a punch.